Moises, you have virtual reality? We have them at home. I'll be honest with you. We look pretty silly walking around with the goggles on our faces. But I'll tell you what we play. We play miniature golf. You think it's easier just to go to Jim Max Ice Cream and play some miniature golf? But no, we put these silly goggles on our heads to play miniature golf. And I'll say one of the courses that we play is at the beach. And it's neat because you kind of wind up around a mountain and stuff. And you're really high above the beach, the ocean below you. And there have been times, and see, I'm in the upstairs playing, and she's in the downstairs playing because you need room to walk around. So I'm there taking my putt, and I'll hit my ball, but unbeknownst, I'll turn around, and in this virtual world is like a cliff. I jump and scream when I turn around because I feel like I'm really falling. So there is this weird fine line between virtual reality and what is reality. Now, epiphany means, in Greek, manifestation, the appearance of God. The dictionary talks about manifestation as being an event that clearly shows an idea brought into physical life. So today we're going to talk about the birth of Christ through the eyes of the Magi. We're going to talk about the baptism of Jesus. And we're going to talk about the first miracle in Cana, where Jesus turned water into wine. But before we do that, I do want to read you an excerpt from something that I found interesting. When I sit and worry about the world or pray about the world, as I'm sure we all do, I worry about our kids a lot. I'm not going to lie to you. I come from a school background. I'm working for Donegal School District, so I see a lot of kids growing up with different mindsets. I see my own grandson who's quick to grab a tablet or a cell phone to play on rather than have conversations. But don't get me wrong, the Epiphany has great meaning behind it, and we're going to get to that, because I believe the story behind the Epiphany, those three events, is to really just drive it home that God is real. He's not a virtual thing to be imagined. God is real. But the problem is, if that's the case, then why do more than 40% of millennials and Gen Zers claim no religious affiliation at all? This is not a theoretical problem. This has been measured, and the reports are in, and it's not looking good. So millennials are people that were born from 1981 to 1996. I don't know if any of us qualify for that. And Gen Zers are 1997 to 2012. I don't know if anyone... I see we have 2 Gen Zers at least, if not 3. You're a Gen Zer, aren't you? Yeah, that's all right. Don't try to fool us with your Beatles t-shirt. All right. But the Gen Zers and the millennials of those generations are not being raised up or brought into a reality of spirituality. They're being raised in a virtual reality. And that has become their God. I'm going to read an excerpt from Charlie Kirk's new book. And I know Charlie Kirk passed away many months ago, but he was working on this book. It's not a political book, so don't worry, I'm not getting political or anything. It's actually a book about observing the Sabbath day, which I need to do. And I was told that I need to do that just yesterday by the conference. But I found this to be interesting, and I found it to be applicable to today's world. So this is Charlie Kirk's new book, Stop in the Name of God. And he writes, part of the reason for this, meaning the lack of connection with newer generations, part of the reason is trust in science and technology. The tools they have, ironically, delivered unprecedented convenience, but not contentment. I can see that. I can see that whatever's going on in front of them, whether it be on an iPad, virtual reality goggles, or whatever, they're accomplishing stuff, whether they save the girl from Donkey Kong or they eat all the little dots. I don't think kids are really playing that anymore. But they're not getting contentment from whatever they're doing. It says, but at a deeper level, the turn towards secularism is about control. The very idea there is a God and he wants you a certain way is now considered offensive, judgmental, and harsh. So the God that loves us, the God that created everything for us, and he asks us to be a certain way or do certain things, we're now seeing that as being judgmental, offensive, and harsh. And it says, in a culture obsessed with self-acceptance and personal freedom, divine authority is viewed not as liberating, but oppressive. And our modern gods are autonomy, affirmation, and endless choices. We're kids in a candy store with endless money, and that's not healthy. That's not healthy. And I'm pointing out generationally the millennials and the Gen Zers, but I think all of us can fall into this category at times, where we feel that God needs to give us everything that we want, and if we don't, we're going to get angry. We're going to throw a fit. We're going to stomp our feet, or maybe even walk away. But there's a bigger problem happening with our youth today. The bigger problem is secularism, or not believing in God, does not leave a vacuum. Meaning it creates a God-shaped void in your life. But more than that, Charlie Kirk says it does not leave a vacuum, it creates counterfeits. So we start to fill that God-shaped void in our life with whatever we can find. And it says, as belief in God of the Bible has diminished, people have not stopped being spiritual. But what's the reality of being spiritual? It's funny, I meet a lot of people that I ask them, do you believe in Jesus Christ? They say, well, I'm spiritual. That's them trying to fill that void in their life. But how do they fill it? It says instead, they have invented pseudo-religions, political ideologies, wellness cults, self-help mysticisms, climate absolutions, and this is the one that gets me, digital tribalism, creating acceptance, value, and worth on something that's not even real. Digital tribalism, people coming together, thinking they have the protection and the safety of one another when they really don't. And these systems that they have formed, they all come complete with dogmas, rituals, prophets, and excommunication. But what they lack is grace, forgiveness, and redemption. That's what God is all about. They mimic the shape of religion while denying the source of the truth. This is what's happening. The younger generations, the newer generations, are stepping back from a God because they find it to be not unbelievable, but controlling, judgmental, and harsh. And that's where we really need to step in. That's where we need to come in with spiritual reality to let them know what it's really like. Because it is quick for a person to dismiss the beliefs of God, the beliefs of the Bible, for what they have in front of them. I might see that big cliff that I'm about to fall off of on the golf course, but it's not real. but the fear that goes with it is real. So today we're going to talk about those 3 points in the Bible where we can show not only that God is real, but that Jesus was who he said he was, the Son of God and our Savior. The first event we're going to look at is the arrival of the Magi. We're going to find it in Matthew 2. This is after the birth of Christ. This is actually some time after the birth of Christ. A lot of times we see him depicted in this scene where they're visiting him as a baby, but he is actually a small child when this event happens. So it starts in chapter 2, verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east and have come to worship him." So a lot of mystery surrounds these men. We don't know who they really were. We don't know how many there were. We base it on what the Bible tells us, but it doesn't give us a complete picture of this. We assume that there were 3 of them because they brought 3 gifts. We consider them wise men or kings by our own definitions. Some say they were scientists. People who studied the stars and were given the gift of one star to find Jesus, the Son of God, God in the flesh, who has come to redeem us all. And with what we just read from Charlie Kirk, today people are trusting in science and losing focus of God. But these 3 men instead, who were scientists, trusted in God and followed that star to find this child that they heard so much about. It said, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. So when these men, these wise men, these magi, whatever you want to call them, came into the town, it disturbed people because they were different and they didn't understand why they were there. Imagine if 3 people in robes came in here carrying gifts and just sort of sat down in the back. You would wonder who they were. So not only did the king wonder who these men were, but the people of Jerusalem. And then the king had gathered all his chief priests and scribes of the people together. So people who studied about God. And he inquired of them of where the Christ was to be born. And so they said to him, in Bethlehem, Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. This is a prophecy found in Micah. And they quoted that to the king, and the king became very angry because he was the only king in his mind. And then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them that the time the star, asked from them the time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for this young child. For when you have found him, bring back the word to me that I may come to worship him also. Was that true? From what we know, absolutely not. He was deceiving these magi, these wise men, these kings, because he wanted to hurt the child. He wanted to destroy the child from this world because he knew this child was real. This child was not an imagination of prophecy. This was a flesh and bone child who was born according to the prophecy. This child was a threat to him because he only cared about himself. He only cared about his fake rule over his land. He didn't know the reality that had just been born in Bethlehem. It said, when they heard the king, they departed. And behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, until it came and stood over where the young child was. Again, young child, not the baby. And they weren't still in this little barn. They had moved on to a better dwelling. And they showed up because the star led them there. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother. And what did they do? They fell down and worshiped him. They knew Jesus had been born. They knew that God's plan was in motion. And yes, they opened their treasures and they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, gifts fit for a king. But this king was not like any of the others. And then being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, and they departed from their own country a different way. They led a different path. As when many of us meet Jesus, lead a different path from what we had before. I will continue to call these men the wise men because they did not seek to exploit the child. They did not seek for the child to fix anything for them. They loved and they worshiped him, and the only thing that they sought out was the knowledge and wisdom of Jesus. They wanted nothing for themselves but the knowledge and wisdom. To me, that makes them wise men. Next, we're going to go with Jesus to his baptism. The baptism can be found in Matthew 3, verse 13. It says, "Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan to be baptized by him. And John tried to prevent him, saying, 'I need to be baptized by you. And are you coming to me?'" We've heard about John in messages in the past. We know his story of his birth and his connection with Jesus. And here is Jesus, the very person that John had talked about, that had prepared a way for him. And now Jesus stands before him and asks to be baptized by him. This has to be hard for John. Because prior to this, when John would baptize people, he would baptize them into redemption. Now here's a sinless man standing before him, and John knew he was a sinless man, and now he is being asked to be baptized by him. I can't imagine the thoughts that went through John's head. Probably the same as when Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. The humility of Christ, the servant attitude of Christ for the people that he loved. But Jesus answered and said to him, "Permit it to be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness." And then he allowed him to be baptized. And this was the beginning of Jesus' relationship with man and woman of this earth, opening up himself to all of our imperfections. When I started writing this message and reading that verse, I started to think back to my own baptism. If you haven't been baptized and you don't have a reference point for being baptized, you may have been baptized as a child. It was very common, and you probably don't remember that. I was baptized as a child, but I was also baptized later in life when I became born again. So if you were not baptized later in life and you don't remember your infant birth, just remember the time when you became born again, if that's still fresh in your mind, and you remember the details. I remember mine very clearly, my baptism, as you're standing up in front of the church with everybody looking at you. And they usually ask you to say a few things. And I know when I said those things that I meant that in my heart. I talked about renouncing the evil of this world, as you might have done. I talked about turning to Christ, following Christ, allowing Christ to make my decisions for me, forgiveness for my sins, and a commitment to Christ in my daily life. Does it sound familiar? Where are you now? And I don't mean in church. Where are you spiritually now? Do you have the same fire? Do you have the same hope? Do you have the same humility and the idea like, Jesus, here is my life. Show me the way. Or has that fire gotten smaller? Are you still renouncing the evil that you have in your life? Do you still turn to Christ with all of your hopes, your dreams, your good times and your bad times? Allowing Him to celebrate with you in good times and comfort you in bad times. Are you back to being that kid in the candy store that if you don't get that piece of candy you want, you get angry? That you feel you deserve that candy? Where are you now? Are you in spiritual reality? Or are you virtually making up things as you go along? So what happened when Jesus was baptized? When he had been baptized, Jesus came up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened to him. And he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him. We can all imagine that in our mind, seeing the light from the skies come down, illuminating Jesus as he comes up from the water. That wasn't enough for God, because suddenly a voice came from the heavens and said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The second affirmation that Jesus is who he said he is. God called him his beloved Son. The interesting thing about our own lives, our own experiences, whether you're baptized, not baptized, born again, we're hoping for the best. We are all children of God. Don't think that this moment of Jesus' affirmation as the Son of God is outside of your inheritance. We've all inherited the kingdom of heaven. But it's only with the presence of God in our life. It's not going to be a God-shaped void that puts us into heaven. It's not a God-shaped void that's going to get us through a bad day. It's not a God-shaped void that's going to have us care about our neighbor, forgive our friend, and accept Christ as our leader. Accept Christ as our Savior. And come out of those waters chosen. Now, the last story we're going to talk about, I even hate calling them stories. They are moments in history. They are not just stories. And this one might sound a little strange to you. We're going to go to John chapter 2. This was Jesus' first miracle, turning water into wine. Now, if you're like me, you think about stuff too much. And you think about, why would Jesus turn water into wine as his first miracle? Why is that a thing? And why is it documented so clearly in the scripture? Because even the back and forth is a little confusing. It starts off in chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. So I'm kind of thinking here, this was before Jesus became famous, for lack of a better term. I'm thinking Jesus was there in connection with his mom, with Mary, because she seems very involved in the wedding. Jesus might have been known as, her son, but he hasn't really made the big name for himself as he does later on in the chapters. A little bit later in the chapters, everybody would have wanted Jesus at their wedding. But here he's just kind of there as a guest at this wedding. And the guest was the son of Mary. And the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Personally, I'm like, okay, drink some water. But that wasn't Jesus' plan. And it's funny because Jesus says to her, "Woman," okay, first off, woman, don't use that line no more. I will say that in Jesus' words here, he's not like saying, "Woman." It's not like Yosemite Sam or anything like that. He's addressing his mother politely, even though it might not sound polite today. He's saying, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour." This is respectful, but at the same time, he says, it's not my time to be revealed. It's not my time to show everyone who I am, because I'm running on God's time. Not because of a wedding running out of wine. I'm not going to reveal myself outside of God's instructions, because he knew all of his powers came from God. I did find it funny then. His mother said to the servant, "Whatever he says, you do it." She had confidence in her son. She knew that her son was a provider. And Jesus, as the son, she put her trust in him. And I think about that too. I'm like, man, I should have that Post-it note up on my refrigerator that says, whatever he says, do it. Because a lot of us don't. I can honestly say many of us, if not all of us, don't. When Jesus tells us to do something, we're more quick to say, well, or I don't know, I'm busy that day. It's raining out. But Mary says, do it. And now there were a set of 6 water pots made of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews. containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. That's a lot of water. And Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water. And he filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted it, the water had been made into wine. Jesus' first miracle. But the one thing that I find interesting is when they took it to the master and the master drank the wine, he did not know where it came from. He just was there, drank it. But the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior wine. But you kept the good wine until now. I find it interesting that Jesus said he was not yet to reveal himself. But yet, who did he reveal himself to? The servants. Those who served. Those who were meek. Those who were looked at as below others. He revealed what he could do to the servant. The master had no idea where the wine had come from, but he knew it was good. The servants knew where it had come from. And they, again, understood the spiritual reality of who this man is. I don't say was, because Jesus isn't past tense. Jesus is. And they knew exactly who he is. So what does this mean? The three wise men show up to see a child, confirming that he is the Son of God that was spoken about in prophecy. When Jesus was baptized, when he came out of the water, the skies opened up, light shone down, a dove flew down, and God himself spoke, saying, "This is my son." But here we are at a wedding in Cana for people that ran out of wine. And God turns water into wine through Jesus. But what does it mean? Speculation, picking at words here and there, trying to figure stuff out, started to open up a whole new meaning to this story, other than the first miracle of Jesus to prove who he was. Let's look at the first verse. It said, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana. So on the third day of this wedding, Jesus chose to do his first miracle. What other story in the Bible does a miracle happen on the third day? When Jesus rose from the dead. I know that's really reading between the lines there, but third day really stood out. Third day means something. And he revealed himself to the servants. And he took the water. Now let's remember also what it says here about the water, that the water was used for purification. Let me find the spot here. It says that the Jews had these large containers of water according to the manner of purification. So the water was pure. And when the water was pulled from the vessels, they became wine. Remaining water stayed purified. That blows my mind, because when we think about the purity of Jesus and the wine, and the third day immediately made me begin to think Jesus was pure, then he shed his blood for us. Do you see the parallelism between the wine and Jesus' blood? It even made me jump a little bit further into that to see the revelation of the water into the wine and the parallel with the blood by going to Exodus 7. They're in the time of the plagues. What was the first plague? Moses. The water turned into blood. Do you remember that? So if you go a little bit farther and you bring that connection back around and say Jesus turned pure water, water used for purification, into wine, representing the blood of Christ. Moses turned the water into blood, the blood that would later spill from Jesus. But what happens on the cross when they drive the spear into the side of Jesus? What happens? What was that? Water came out. Water, the purification of Jesus, turned into wine, the blood of Christ. And at the crucifixion, when they pierced his side, that he had passed, that he had died, water came out. The purification, the blood became pure again through the water pouring out of his side. This vessel represents the sacrifice of Jesus. And not only does it represent the sacrifice of Jesus, I think the vessels can represent every single one of us. Are we empty? Are we empty vessels? Are we useless water pots? No. But how do we fill ourselves back again? If we're all empty water pots sitting around a wedding, how do we bless others? By allowing Jesus to fill us back up again. Jesus filling us back up again is the only way we're going to get filled up again. Do not look at that void in your vessel as something that could be filled with something else of this world. We can't look to digital realities to fill those spaces. We have to look at spiritual reality. Because as followers of Christ, as children of God, we know that Jesus is the only one who can fill our vessels. Because we know that God is real. Let's pray.